Hi guys, I think this is all set up now. My name is Taha Iqbal. Currently based in London, so recording this really late, but possibly very early for you guys. I wished I could have done this session live and gotten questions from you all. But as we have it due to time zone differences, I'm having to do this as a recorded session. I don't plan on taking too much time. I know there's sort of like a discussion around maybe this going for an hour, but I honestly believe that I can't talk about like speeches for an hour. And I also don't want to bore you as a second thing. But yeah, I'm probably going to run through this very quickly. And if you have any questions, feel free to drop messages on Facebook, and I'll be happy to answer those. Cool. Quickly, we're going to be talking about adapting across speeches in this session, but I realize that that's a really vague statement because I mean it's not clear adapting how or adapting to what. I'm going to divide this into three specific areas. One, I'm going to talk a bit about speaker roles and specific speaker strategies that I like. I'm not going to go into too much detail about, what a first speech or a second speech or a third speech is going to do. I'm going to rely on your common sense and to some degree your experience in debate and your ability to read the rules that you're able to differentiate what the role of a first speaker is from a third speaker. I'll go briefly over it, but not spend too much time. What I am going to spend time around is exactly what sort of strategies we should use, and I'll give some tips on what we need to keep in mind. I have the unique advantage of having gone first, second, third, and reply in my career. So I pretty much know every single position and I'm equally shit at all of them. Then I'm going to go into the role of prep in adapt speech evolution or adaptation. I know this sounds really weird. How can you adapt to something that you've not really experienced or something that you don't really know? Because the other team hasn't spoken yet, but we're going to go through why prep matters because I think that's going to be an essential part of how we construct our speeches, but also how we adapt on the floor. The third one is what happens when you are inevitably forced out of prep and there's something new that you need to handle in a round. So yeah, planning on covering all three. Again, don't plan on taking too much time. Quickly moving on to speaker roles. With regards to the first speaker, I think, and there's some responsibilities that you have. You have to define the parameters, perhaps clarify what specific words an emotion might mean or what a specific policy in the motion it might mean. This might require you to give a model or some framing. That's usually going to be the role of first speakers. This obviously applies to both first prop and first op. And you frame the round, you introduce the key chunks of the case on either side. And the debate runs through. There's a few things that I want to talk about, mostly on the strategy side, that get sort of missed. One of the strategies in first speaker is, and some speakers can do it well, others can't. Again, this is an assessment that you yourself can come up with, i.e., which style suits you, but also something that you can discuss in your team and then come to a conclusion about. There's some speakers who like to get out a lot of content early. So ideally, they front load and they run through the entirety of the case. This could be like three arguments, and they quickly like blitz through all of the arguments. Now, if you are able to speak very quickly and cleanly, use words efficiently, and explain lots of arguments in your first speeches, my recommendation would be 100% go for it. If you can get out more material in your first speeches, get it out. However, lots of people like me, for instance, people who are ESL or EFL, or even people who like to speak slowly, perhaps, will not be able to blitz through every single argument. So it's sort of impossible for them to front load. In that scenario, it's completely fine for you to leave an argument to your second speaker. But what is obviously crucial is that you still maintain the quality of your arguments and you build those arguments to their conclusion and you weigh them correctly. For both speeches, it is extremely important that whatever you say, you build it to where it needs to be built. Far too often, one of the mistakes that first speakers make is they will introduce an argument. They will usually do the bit where they will introduce mechanisms and they will also impact the argument. But far too often in debate, first speakers don't weigh arguments. They think that this might be the responsibility of third speakers or second speakers or whatever, but they completely miss out weighing. Whereas weighing is perhaps the area where you need to spend the most amount of time. So remember to always weigh your arguments as first proposition. It gives the entirety of your team a metric to weigh, or I guess like just to judge the other side's arguments by, and something that can be used as a reference point for judges whenever they're coming up with a call. So do complete your arguments. If you're trying to blitz through arguments, it is obviously not advisable to say out or like speak about five different things and not complete any of them. So complete your thoughts, complete the argument, and if necessary, you can move something around. Um, the second thing I want to say, in terms of, I guess, specific strategies at first, for both first props and first ops, it is extremely, I guess, beneficial in my experience to take the first POI you get. Oftentimes, these POIs tend to be clarifications, so they're not really attacks on your case, which is one benefit. The second benefit is it allows you to clarify the parameters of the debate, and essentially it means that you're less likely to have a really muddled debate where you require the judges to intervene really heavily into deciding who's won what and why. So take that away, and take the first POI. But the second reason why taking the first POI really benefits you as a team, especially in terms of, again, adapting across speeches, which is the theme of this discussion, is if you take the first POI you give your second and third speakers more time to be able to think about what possibly is going to come from the other side in terms of their attack. You give them more time to therefore also think about the responses that they want to come up with. Again, the more time they have to think about something they need to respond to, the better, because they can investigate and scrutinize their own thoughts much more than, if they're just thinking about something new and they just have 30 seconds to say it. So give them more time, take your first POIs. The third thing, just within speaker strategy, and I think this applies much more to obviously first opposition than first proposition, do not get into the habit of refuting claims too much. Try to integrate negative material within your positive material. In most scenarios, if both teams have gotten the motion correctly and they're running the correct arguments, the first arguments are going to be natural clashes off each other. So introduce them as clashes, introduce them as positive material. If you want to do rebuttal, two pieces of extraneous rebuttal are fine. Spend no more than 2 minutes of rebuttal. 2 minutes on your introduction and rebuttal. Make sure you leave the vast majority of your speech to build on positive material. Excuse me. The second thing, moving on to, I guess, second speakers, is there's again two ways of doing a second speech. I have no preference for either, but I think there's some arguments to be made for why one is much better in an Asian style debate than the other. Some second speakers tend to follow the line that I guess their first speakers have taken, and they structure their speeches around specific clashes that have happened at first. Any sort of addition they might have in terms of a mechanism or framing is then counted on as a sort of an additional layer on top of stuff that's already been discussed by first. Some people usually obviously like do this bit in the rebuttal parts of their speeches, and then they have a completely new argument as well. Again, both of those are fine. Just remember, second speeches are designed to be responsive, but also to build, and not build in the same way that a third speech would, where a third speech oftentimes relies on rebuttals to build, whereas second is technically your last opportunity to say something new in the round, and something that the judges should take into consideration with regards to positive material. So remember that. Now, also on to seconds, and I guess what ideal time splits are. I would not recommend doing seconds in the following structure that some people do it in, which is some rebuttal, some discussion of my first speaker's case, and then something new. I would again recommend that you integrate everything into issues, even if you have a new argument, explain it as a third issue or whatever. But yeah, integrate as much as possible. Save yourself as much time as possible. Cool. So in second speakers, I mentioned there's two strategies, and I mentioned that one of them is more useful than the other objectively. I think the strategy of coming up with a new line of argument or something new is definitely an advantage in rounds for the specific reason that it increases the amount of work that the other side needs to do to beat you, but also it gives you some strategic flexibility in third and reply where you sometimes want to shift the discussion uh, and make one argument or one issue seem more important than the other. The more you have, I am obviously the more you have, the better your chances of winning. It just gives you much more flexibility and options at third and reply. So yeah, if it is the case that we have to come up with a new argument for second, how do we not suck? And this is again something that happens all in lots of second speeches where they really have nothing second speaker arguments in them. They essentially waste 2 minutes on a shit argument and then just move on. So definitely don't do that. If you don't have a new argument, don't run it. Seriously, just don't waste your time. Uh, but how do you get a good argument then if you want to run it? My top tip here is think like an extension speaker. Whenever you're doing BP and you're going extension, one of the things that everybody tells you is like, don't start writing down your case. If you start writing down your case, what happens if OG or OO takes it? If your opening half takes your case, then you're essentially screwed. Yes, you are. But the way that you compensate for it whenever you're thinking like an extension speaker is you're not thinking in terms of, okay, this is what my case is going to be. You're thinking in terms of, okay, this is what the initial clash between OG and OO is going to be. In this sort of scenario, OG and OO are first prop and first op. So if you're second prop and you're thinking in terms of an extension speaker, there's two or three questions you can ask. One is, um, what's the deadlock going to be? What is the essential clash, and how can I resolve that clash? Lots of people do this in extensions. If you can do this in second speeches, then what that gives you is the natural ability to evolve your speech um, further than analytically, at least further than what your first speaker would have said. The second thing is whenever you're doing this sort of like I guess thinking like an extension speaker, you're thinking of so what sort of scenarios or what sort of context is the opening half going to miss? Is there something that's sort of on the side that nobody's thinking about? Is there some meta commentary that I can do? Whatever that is, it at least enables you to or forces you just psychologically to think differently and think as if you're in competition with your first. And that competition enables you to come up with new arguments. So yeah, that's my top tip for second speakers. For third speakers, I guess the traditional role is you rebut the other side, you remember not to provide new arguments, and if you really do need to get in new arguments for new claims, you frame them as responses. That's basically the structure. It's, I guess, very self-evident. Third speeches are not useless. They're essentially very useful, even though lots of judges seem to think otherwise, at least in Pakistan. Third speeches are really crucial, but they're also one of the most. Third is probably the most strategic speech that you can have in the round. I think third has the most influence in how a round is about to go for a few reasons. Thirds are the last substantive speeches that judges are going to listen to. Remember, judges don't have infinite amounts of capacity to process information and keep their attention going on. So in first and second, while they're trying their best to keep their attention, there's going to be some lapses and they're going to miss a few things. They're going to not remember those as well. There's obviously recency in terms of how human beings think. Recent things make a lot more sense to us or are easy to remember and recollect as opposed to things that have happened in the past. So yeah, thirds then need to be super strategic. Super strategic in two senses. One, how you structure your speech. And my top tip for how you structure your third speech is sort of mirroring what your second's done. If the second's been good, if they've been shit, then obviously don't mirror them because then you'll be shit. But yeah, mirror your second speaker's speech and mirror it in terms of structure, i.e., how have they prioritized different issues over the other? And then with that I guess, structural frame in mind, you can go through arguments one by one and add new responses where you think you need to add more responses, or where you've seen new responses that other members of your team haven't identified. So that's a clear way of evolution, but it's also, I guess, not exactly evolution, but consistency across the bench, and that consistency will help you build sort of like an image of your case in the minds of judges, to just solidify their thinking with regards to exactly what that case is going to be like. And apart from, I guess, just the structure, there's two things that I guess define how you should prioritize things, apart from how your second speaker has done it. One of them is, where are you losing and where are you winning the round? I mean, the first question, where are you losing, can be used to structure your speech such that you prioritize the arguments that the opposition is stronger on. So if you identify which clash you're using, you decide to devote more time to that clash and try to win it in third, or at least try to, like, I guess, study the ship a bit. This is a specific strategy for when you think you're losing a round. Just focus on exactly the biggest hole in your case, and where the opposition is winning, where you're losing. If you do feel like it is a case where it's either sort of like, I guess, there's some questions up in the air, or you think it's an easy win. In either scenario, my recommendation is then to go to the other side, which is, where are we winning? Whereby, if a debate's sort of like 50-50 on a couple of issues, you're winning one, the other side's winning one, then my recommendation is always to prioritize the issue that you're winning on, and just really weigh it at third and say, this is why this issue is more important. Remember, you don't need to win every single clash in a debate. You just need to win the most important ones. So yeah, explain to a judge why you're winning can be a powerful tool, especially at the top of your speech, and then you can give some time to different responses. But yeah, that's my advice. Look at what your second speaker is doing. Ask yourself where you're losing, if you're losing badly, and third, ask yourself where you're winning, if you're winning, or if it's a 50-50 thing. That's my take on speaker roles and speaker strategies. I'll quickly move on to prep. The reason why I mentioned prep here, and again, I'm not going to give you like exact things you should do in prep, because different things work for different teams. I don't think my method's going to be any better than your method, um, necessarily. I mean, most probably, but not necessarily. So yeah, you can prep however you want to, but there's a couple of things that I want to flag in terms of what we need to do in prep and why prep is important. I'll start off with the latter thing first. Prep is super important because prep is more time than you will get in the debate to think about specific things. Prep is also where you have a discussion strategically about where your team should likely be headed in the round, the way you want your speeches to go, and exactly what you want to say in different speeches. Maybe not third, because obviously third is going to be a lot more responsive, but at least for first and second, it gives both speakers an idea of what their responsibilities in that specific round are. But it is also important in prep to minimize time spent on bureaucratic bullshit, which is unfortunately something that will happen necessarily in the UADC style. One of those issues is going to be, you obviously need to agree on one motion out of three, so that takes some time out of your prep. Um, and then you have stuff like silent prep. So my recommendation is, um, give different people in your team different responsibilities. Some people are strategically just much better inclined, so maybe follow their lead on what topic you should prioritize, what topic you should essentially veto, and then you can go on from there. But 100% try to limit the amount of time you spend on choosing the motion. That gives you more time to think about the motion. And the second thing is, don't spend a lot of time in silent prep. Especially don't spend a lot of time thinking about what the model is going to be or what blah 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 is going to be. Yes, if you have thoughts on framing, collect those, but silent prep for about around 2 minutes is usually required so that you can develop a breadth of ideas. You want to come up with as many ideas as possible during the first few minutes, and then what you need to do is take some time to break those ideas down, see which ones fit and see which ones are shit. Take out the shit, keep the fit ones, and then develop them. So yeah, first tip, save time. Save time as much as possible so you can have better discussions. Now, what is a better discussion? Oftentimes teams have this habit of devoting either some time at the end of prep to think about what the opposition is going to say, or having one speaker, usually the third, go to the side and think about what opposition is going to say, and then they make like a pool of rebuttals or whatever. Don't do that. Whenever you're building an argument, think about what opposition is going to say and integrate it within your prep. The reason why that's useful, again, is if you build an argument and you go like, this is the frame, these are the mechanisms, this is the conclusion, and this is the impact and the weighing that we're going to use. Think about what you would do to beat this argument if you were in opposition, because otherwise you're not going to find holes or in your mechanisms because you obviously have a bias with the arguments that you've come up with. It is only when you start attacking them that you identify that there are specific gaps within arguments. The reason why this is extremely useful and was useful in the latter stages of my career was because if you can identify where mechanisms are missing, so one of the key ways of refuting an argument is saying one link is missing, or something's missing, or something that's right within the internal structure of the argument, you can then spur yourselves on by asking a question as to where it's missing, what you need to say, and what your response is going to be. So yeah, think about opposition case whenever you're thinking about your arguments, and you'll naturally come up with sort of rebuttals or more mechanisms or some responses. And obviously, based on what the argument is and the priority of the argument, you can either integrate that response into first speaker speech, or you can leave that response for your seconds such that they don't have to think on the floor. Again, we need to minimize the amount of time we think on the floor and use as much of time in prep as possible, because we're going to make much better decisions when we have 10 minutes to think about them as opposed to when we have 30 seconds to think about them or like a minute to think about them. So you want to minimize the amount of risk you take on the floor, and try to be as preemptive in prep and early speeches as possible. It just allows you great privileges with regards to not being spontaneous. I know people like spontaneity, but like in debates, it's usually your downfall. Cool. Lastly, what do we do when we are out of prep? How do we fix that gap? Um, yeah, so my first comment is listen. And I know I've said this, and lots of people think this is sort of cringe, which it sort of is also something that's repetitive. But it's really important for you to listen to opposition speeches. There should be no point in time during the debate round where all three speakers in a team are speaking to each other, because obviously that means they're not listening to what's going on the floor. Make sure you listen attentively. Make sure you do not miss a specific thing that they say, because again, if you miss something, chances are in third and reply, they're going to harp on about it, make a big deal, and possibly swing the judge's decision. So just make sure you don't miss anything that they say. Make sure there's at least two people at a time listening to a speech, if not three. Obviously, I'm allotting some leeway for people writing their speeches, which means they can't actively listen, but try to actively listen as much as possible. With that listening, I think the second point comes in, which is take notes. Whichever way works for you is fine. Some people do it by laptop. If you're doing by laptop, just remember to use bold italics or like different colors, just so that you can keep track of exactly who said what and what your response needs to be. Again, with taking notes, I think it's useful to either use highlighters or different colored pens. Again, whatever works for you is fine. Just make sure that those notes are legible for you, understandable for you, and then you can use them to then guide your speeches. But the reason why those notes are also going to be perhaps important is because of inter-team communication. And communication is super important in terms of doing something out of prep, or maybe you're faced with an issue that seems unresolvable. I've written a joke about Hamza here, but hopefully at some point he'll see this and he'll appreciate it. But just remember, you're not the perfect speaker. You're not always the smartest person in the room. You just might never be the smartest person in the room. However you want to see it, just make sure whenever you're questioning something, whenever you're confused, ask your teammates. Your teammates might have a better idea. Or alternatively, if you're the teammate with the better idea, make sure you either send a note or communicate with the next speaker that's going to go in, and explain whatever your point is to them. Make sure that obviously happens in between speeches where you can discuss this, but make sure you communicate very effectively as a team, and no things are left unsaid for, once the debate's already done and then you're coming up with that stuff. That's not useful. It's useful to communicate and communicate well. Within the communication, though, one of the things that matters a lot is not just communicating. Oftentimes, people just communicate in terms of, "Oh, we should ask this POI," or "Whoa, he said that. That's so wrong." Don't be like that. Don't waste that time. Either point out a specific rebuttal you feel is really crucial to their point being bad. Don't just like groan or moan or whatever. Just say something substantive. Remember, the other person after you is already under pressure. They need to give a speech and they're probably preparing. So don't waste their time with bullshit. So communicate effectively. But also in terms of communication, communication isn't always about arguments and rebuttals. You can have a discussion about uh, how you want to structure your speech or how they should structure their speech. Perhaps what issues they should prioritize. Perhaps which issues they shouldn't forget. One of the discussions me and Hamza used to have, and even my previous partners, is just remember to respond to this. So if you trust your partner with the responsive, they're extremely confident with how they need to respond, and they don't require your input, that's fine. But do have a discussion around, okay, this is something that is essential. We need to discuss this in your speech. And the benefits of that are going to be great. So again, what communication allows you to do is, if even if you're out of prep, at least you have three minds thinking about something as opposed to you thinking about it yourself. Again, this makes the risk of it a lot less, and probably means you're going to come in with better responses to whatever situation you're encountering. And the last thing I want to say is, debate isn't always about just objective argumentation, just like a search for the truth. Debating is very seldom won by the team that has the philosophically or analytically better argument, like we'd like to think it. But the debating is also like a comparative activity that centers around human beings. And human beings, as we know, are emotional, but also susceptible to lots of biases, and they give off lots of signals. So remember to read the room with regards to the arguments that you are running. By read the room, I mean read the body language of your judges. Are they grinning at a specific point you've made or some other speakers made? Are they smiling at something? Are they laughing at something, which they ideally should not be doing? But if they are laughing, then definitely that's a cue for you to pivot. Or are they looking up towards the sky, perhaps confused about something? Judges will give off a lot of stuff, and if you interpret that the same way as you interpret information coming from the other team, as information crucial to you swinging around, it makes you, I guess, more attuned to what specific areas of the case you want to focus on and what you don't want to focus on. And also read the body language of your team. Most of the debate rounds that I've lost because I haven't really lost after the judge has told me I've lost. It's generally been a feeling in the team during the round, essentially after first and second speeches, that we're losing this round. So if it does seem like judges don't like your case, if it does seem like your team doesn't like your case, that's fine. You have ample opportunity at thirds or reply to change essentially the outcome of a debate. But just be cognizant of where the room is going and the feel of the room. And I know that this is something that might come off as voodoo or whatever, but this essentially helps. An excellent example of this would be the first octo final that I spoke in my first UADC back in 2017. We were up against a really strong team. The motion had something to do with employers mandating mental health checkups, or I guess mandating that employees report mental health, the results of their mental health checkups regularly to their employers. And essentially something for all employees. The context of the round is like, I think the unfortunate MH370 disaster happened like a few months prior. That was playing on everyone's minds. So we stupidly thought at proposition that we were going to run a case where we were going to argue that it is essentially great for employers to require mental health checkups and assess the results of mental health checkups that employees go through, because it has a direct impact on customer safety. Obviously, we thought in our faulty thinking that if people were deemed to be, I guess, somewhat dangerous or threatening to themselves or to others, it would be great for people. But essentially, that's not what the debate's about. And sometimes this will happen, right? Like sometimes you will just come up with a shit claim, you will misinterpret it around, and then it'll all go downhill really quickly. But me and my third speaker saw that it was going down really quickly. We saw first opposition come in and completely destroy our case. But that's not where you panic. I guess where you panic is when you've not tried anything.
We had a quick discussion, and another top tip here is we looked at exactly what opposition case was. The entirety of opposition case was about why this would be this would incur further harms on already vulnerable employees suffering from mental health illnesses or disease, or just going through a rough time. And the added pressure wouldn't be great for their mental health, or wouldn't be great for business or whatever, and just generally would be quite harmful. And we said, okay, so the only way to win this round then is if they've already proven that people who are vulnerable are more important stakeholders than potential customers and they're concerned for health and safety. If that is the essential stakeholder that opposition has identified, if the judges are nodding to what they're saying, then this is potentially the area for us to focus on. So I completely shifted my speech and gave like 5 reasons or 6 reasons for why the world would be much better for people suffering from mental health illnesses after this policy goes through. We luckily ended up winning that round, but there we showed essentially some of the principles that I've been speaking about, where my speech was mirrored by my third speaker, and then my reply mirrored the speeches that we had done before, just generally setting the tone for this is actually what our case is. I know our first speaker was shit, but like you can disregard it. This is what most of our speeches have been about. And luckily they weren't able to respond, and we went through. So remember, you will go wrong. And if it does go wrong, it's not something that's necessarily going to lead to a loss. If you think about where you're going wrong, if you keep on asking where we're winning, where we're losing, and you communicate with your team, you will be able to come up with answers to different problems. But more crucially, and going back to the topic of this debate, you will be able to adapt across speeches. Adaptation across speeches is not just down to specific speakers. It is more a product of what the team has done in prep, but also what the team discusses on the debate room floor. Cool, that's it from my end. I hope this is useful for you guys. If anybody has any questions, again, feel free to reach out on Facebook. Otherwise, I wish everyone good luck for the tournament. I know it's going to be great. I wish I was there. And really sad I couldn't get to do this live. All right, bye-bye, guys. Good luck.